Are we live? Hola, cage fighting connoisseurs. This is KidNate at BloodyElbow.com, and we are cracking today. I guarantee.
Taking the reins with authority.
Show. Indeed, indeed. Well, I normally push the button today, Zane. I delegated the button pushing to Zane, and look what happened.
Never again.
I should have done like the hand signals from like the '80s TV shows. Like.
I was thinking like
Mr. Thick.
signals. You could be like, give him some some nice silent directions.
Good stuff. But it would all have been wasted on me. We are here for the MMA Vivisection for Machida versus Romero. This was supposed to be the tough Brazil 4 finale, but apparently the visa authorities have pretty much canceled the whole card. So we're going to muddle through just like the UFC is doing. Fellas, thoughts on the card? Connor, you can go first.
It's been damaged obviously by the fight cancellations. There are still some good matchups on here that I'm interested to see. There are also a lot of ones that are just not terribly compelling. Unfortunately, it seems like they've kind of, I don't know, this kind of it harkens back to the start of like the UFC's expansion when it was like you were really noticing a lot of guys who didn't seem to belong in the UFC getting brought in to fill out spots against prospects, and it was like the UFC was just casting a really wide net. And, you know, no disrespect to the fighters at the bottom of this card, but there are a few of those guys, and having lost some of the bigger, more interesting fights, or at least more well-matched fights, they tend to stand out a little bit.
Yeah, this does feel like a 2003 UFC card where it's like one big fight at the top and then like just some random guys where you're like, who the hell is that again? Oh, okay.
Yep, because we're not getting Nikita Krylov, we're not getting Hanayana, we're not getting Eric Silva, no Rick Story. I mean, it's carnage. It's carnage, but we're going to muddle through. There's 4 fights on Fox Sports 2 prelims, nothing on Fight Pass. First up, bantamweights Danny Martinez and Serwan Kukai. Now, could this be one of the guys you're talking about?
No.
Well, then tell us all about him.
It's Zane and I were just discussing this one, how much we're looking forward to it. I guess this isn't the Care Don't Care, so we will.
That'll be later today, actually, at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Okay, well then we can be all cynical about it. It's an okay fight, but only because the level is low. You know what I mean? Like the fact that both of these guys probably aren't UFC caliber almost makes it a better matched fight. Like at least they're kind of on a competitive level. I'd rather see 2 blue belts fight than a black belt beat up a blue belt. So that's kind of what it is. You know, Danny Martinez, as Zane and I were just discussing, fought in an MMA bout in shoes in 2012. So that kind of just tells you what a wrestle boxer he is, and that's just kind of his style. He's pretty explosive. He's done some high amplitude throws, although notably most of those high amplitude throws have come against guys in Explode Fight Series, and we all know how that promotion is run. So it's hard to say how dominant his wrestling really is, especially
and if you don't know, badly is how the Explode Fight Series is run. So
yeah, that sums it up pretty well. And basically, you know, he lost to Scott Jorgensen last year, and pretty convincingly. And like no disrespect to Scott Jorgensen, but most people tend to have competitive fights with him these days. Danny Martinez could not. I still think he's got an advantage over Serwan Kukai, who is just kind of run-of-the-mill, doesn't seem to have any skills that really stand out. So I guess I'll go with Martinez. I think I've already spoken too long about this fight.
I see. And Zane, quick thoughts? Quick.
Yeah, Kukai got beat by Chris Beal in the opening round to Tough, and Beal is not a special talent, quite frankly. And he just is kind of slow, and despite training at ATT and being around for a long time, it just doesn't feel like there's any part of his game that is like developed. You know, it doesn't feel like he knows what he's doing out there. It feels like everything is just kind of jumbled, like, oh, I'm kickboxing now, and I'll just try and shoot for a takedown, try and cage grind a little. Martinez, you at least know, is just going to go out, throw punches, shoot for a takedown, and try and ride out top control. And that's not, he's not amazing at it, but it's consistent. So I got to kind of take Martinez.
I see. And odds makers like Martinez as well. Again, we're getting our odds from OddsShark, the official SBN partner, if you engage in the venal sin of gambling, which we, of course, don't sully ourselves with. However, Martinez is about minus 125 to minus 145, and Kukai is plus one. Oh, well, somebody has him at minus 105, but all the way up to plus 122, mostly on the positive side of things. That brings us to the second Fox Sports 2 fight, welterweight Steve Montgomery and Tony Sims. The excitement is palpable. Zane, you can go first.
I actually like this fight. For a short notice fight, this is actually better booked than probably the rest of the cards. The cards other short notice bouts. Montgomery is weirdly, he's taken a really strange route to get to the UFC. He went through Fight Master and through the most recent season of Tough, neither of which he did well in at all. He got knocked out in Fight Master in the opening round, and then he had a seizure on Tough and never fought. But he's actually gotten a lot better since the Fight Master loss, which was a while ago. He knocked out Brock Jardine with a flying knee over in Titan FC, and he's really big and rangy. Reminds me a lot of Mike Pyle, right down to the mullet. And Tony Sims, on the other hand, is actually like he had a really long history as an amateur boxer as a kid, and he's a really comfortable pocket boxer with a lot of power and accuracy, and he wrestled a little too, so he does a little wrestling behind it, nothing too complicated, but basic takedown stuff. Maybe not the best athlete, but a fun, high-volume power boxer, and exactly the kind of guy that Montgomery struggles with. I like Montgomery a lot, but I'm going to pick Sims here just because Montgomery tends to get hit hard early in fights, and Sims tends to knock people out early in fights.
Sounds like fun. And Connor, your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a pretty interesting matchup. I have to agree. Tony Sims, that Mike Pyle comparison really stands true with Montgomery, where he gets shellacked early and he gets beat up, but he's pretty resilient and he tends to improve as the fight goes on. He had his fight with Brock Jardine in
Titan,
thank you, and Titan FC, and almost got dropped early with a left hook, kind of got tagged, beat up a little bit. Same thing Mike Pyle goes through in his fights. As the fight wore on, he started to find his range, started to land these nice little counter strikes, and ended up knocking Jardine out with a knee in the clinch. Very Mike Pyle-esque there, too. So it's tough to say. I think I might give Montgomery the edge here. I don't think that Sims has really gotten any wins that really impressed me. And Montgomery, I do think, is a little more of just a mixed martial artist. It may sound like a cop-out kind of explanation here, but I think just the variables in his game will give him a chance to at least get through that first round. And Sims certainly tends to struggle more when he can't knock a guy out early, and Montgomery is hittable, but he's resilient. So I'm going to go with Montgomery.
I see, and the panel is split. The odds makers, however, they like Montgomery as well. They've got him favored from minus 135 all the way up to minus 160. And Sims is the underdog at plus 115 all the way up to plus 125. That brings us to Leandro Silva and Luis Gonzalez in the welterweight division as well. And Connor, you can go first this time.
This is an okay fight. Boy, I just feel the energy's low today, huh? It's hard to get really amped up for any of these. I feel like I've had this conversation for ages. But I think that Leandro Silva is a pretty decent fighter. He did really well against Drew Dober early and started to kind of falter as that fight went on. Of course, he lucked out with that nice little, that devastating half-guard guillotine with which he just rendered Dober completely unconscious. And then for Luis Gonzalez... Oh my God! I'm just finding it so hard to even care about these fights. Gonzalez is like a decent, well-rounded fighter. He's done a decent job with. He did a decent job in his fight with Luis Palomino before getting cracked and knocked out. He handles himself pretty well in close range. I'm gonna go with Leandro Silva, and I think that's it. I'm so sorry. I have nothing.
All right. Yeah. I don't know. This is one of those fights I think that's really just going to kind of be about who implements their game better. My problem with Leandro Silva, I do like him skill-wise. I think he's a good wrestler, a good striker, and a good grappler, but he's really low output. Like, stupid low output. The kind of thing that will lose him rounds against somebody he can't physically dominate. And on the other side of that, Luis Gonzalez is kind of a throwback wrestle boxer. He's kind of, like, I think I'd kind of compare him to like Mike Pierce maybe, where it's just like, no kicking game at all, not the most fluid boxing, but aggressive boxing, and then a very solid wrestling takedown game. I think if Gonzalez can keep himself from getting overwhelmed by Silva, just physically, he can beat him. I don't know. It's tough. I think I might go with Gonzalez here, just because I think of the output, and then the wrestling matches up well enough that I don't think Leandro Silva is just gonna get takedowns and be able to hold position. But it should be an interesting fight. I think it actually will match up very much just who can implement their game from two guys who are going to both try and probably wrestle this one to victory.
Do you think Silva's a little bit like Alan Patrick, but like without the pop at range?
Yeah, I would say he's a lot like that. It's the same sort of like big, sort of wrestle-centric Brazilian fighter who strikes some, but like...
This game's a little disconnected.
Yeah, it's very disconnected, and it's a kind of physicality that can't, like, we saw with McDessie, can just win fights sometimes.
How's the process?
Bad.
Bad process.
That's when things are disconnected, the process is bad.
I thought that, but I just wanted to double check. Okay,
come on, Nate, that's basic process right there.
Yeah,
you should know that.
All right, I'm just, I'm trying to get a handle on this. I'm not clear yet. I'm working my way through the Dianetics program. So we've got Silva favored -147 all the way up to -160. Gonzalez is the dog at +125 all the way, +120 all the way up to +133, and that brings us to the final fight of the Fox Sports 2 prelims. Alex Oliveira versus Joe Merritt, welterweights again. And I know I've been waiting for this fight for a long time. Dreams come true, kids. Zane, you can go first.
All right, I'm excited to see Alex Oliveira again. I'm glad he's coming back around again. He just choked out KJ Noons. He's a fun action fighter. I think he's a very promising fighter. Merritt is a guy. Like, he's coming out of Millennial Fight, the Millennia Fight Camp, which is like where he's Lorenz Larkin's training partner and has been for a long time. And he fights basically exactly like Lorenz Larkin used to, which is to say, throw one strike at a time and hope that knocks your opponent out, because otherwise you're probably losing. Merritt's, he's an athlete coming into MMA and picking up the game, and none of the parts are really there except that he's an okay range striker when he gets a ton of time to pick his shots, and I don't think Oliveira is going to give him that time at all. And so I think this should be a pretty easy walkover for Oliveira.
And Connor, your take?
Yeah, I guess like the advantage that Merritt has going for him is that he's on the same card as Larkin, and since they're training partners, he's gotten to kind of peak with Larkin, who is now finally coming into a fight riding a little bit of confidence after having a dominant win in his last time out. So that's going for him. There's maybe an opening there for some of that precision striking. Larkin has always had, when an opponent presses Larkin, that's when the holes started to show. But like, given the opportunity and the range to strike, he was always a pretty solid offensive boxer. He had a varied kicking game, obviously, and I think Merritt, like Zane said, is pretty similar. So, and Cowboy Oliveira, he kind of got pieced up a little bit before choking out KJ Noons in his last fight. Noons had a lot of success with that boxing early, so there's an opening there. But Oliveira's game is pretty solid. He's got pretty good defensive grappling. He's very big and strong. And it makes him very intimidating in the clinch, and obviously he showed off some nice back takes in his last fight as well. He's also got some powerful strikes. He's a good counter striker, decent defense. I just think he's a more well-rounded fighter, and obviously he's beaten a better level of competition, even just in his last fight, than Joe Merritt's ever really faced. So you kind of have to pick Cowboy Oliveira here.
Oh, and Merritt's only faced almost exclusively explode cans except his last fight. So
Pretty much, exactly. Like, it's all like rapid knockouts or complete domination. So he's never. I mean, we know Oliveira can take a beating at the very least. So how much is it even? How difficult is it even going to be for a guy like Merritt to realize that he can't put this guy away or dominate him? That's got to be. It's going to be a reality check, I think.
Ain't no can like an Explode Fighting Series can. I'll tell you that from bitter experience. And the odds makers have Oliveira heavily favored. Biggest odds on the card so far: minus 427, minus 415, all the way up to minus 470. And for Merritt, plus 300 all the way up to plus 363. So some pretty ugly odds there. And now we get to the Fox Sports 1 main card, starting with featherweights Hakran Diaz and Levon Makhachev from Georgia. Connor, you go first.
Remind me, Makhachev fought
Makhachev fought
Markadiva, right?
Yeah, Markadiva.
In his last fight. That was a pretty good fight, if I recall correctly.
Yep.
It kind of showed some of the weaknesses of and some of the strengths of Makashvili's game. He really seemed, Adiva's not a world-class fighter by any means, but it definitely proved that he was well-rounded enough to give a grappling-centric fighter like Makashvili some problems. And Makashvili ended up being kind of stuck at range and having to dive in on desperate takedowns a lot during that fight. Fortunately for him, Adiva did not have the volume to really make him pay for sticking him out there at range and forcing him into these striking exchanges. Hakran Diaz isn't really going to do the same thing. In fact, all signs point to the idea that Hakran Diaz is going to try to grapple with Makashvili. So we could end up with a really interesting grappling match here on our hands. Hakran Diaz is a very experienced, very well-rounded grappler. It's just hard to think of any aspect of MMA grappling that he doesn't do a good job of. He's good position. He's good with his control. His takedowns are decent enough. He passes guard well, and Makashvili does all these things well. I think I'm gonna pick. I think I'm gonna pick Makashvili because that's a really tough call to make because it's a big step up. Hakran Diaz is okay. I'm picking Hakran Diaz. I'm gonna chicken out and pick Hakran Diaz. I just think Diaz is big. He's strong. Yes, he is going to play Makashvili on Makashvili's turf, but that's Diaz's turf too. There's a reason why he usually accepts fights there, and he's not a terrible striker at range. He's had a lot more experience to learn how to make all the aspects of his game work. So, unfortunately, it looks like the UFC is kind of giving Makashvili the Mike Rhodes treatment here, and just letting him fail upwards against an increasingly more difficult level of competition. So we'll see what they do with him after this, but it's not an easy fight for him. Even if he does have a chance, it's not easy.
Well, that doesn't sound very fun. And Zane, what do you think?
I was going to say, well, I think part of that, too, is that Makashvili, like Rhodes, has been willing to step up on short notice and take fights that he probably shouldn't. The Adiva fight was good, and he won it, but he stepped in for Skelly here, who, this is probably a much more prime fight for Chaz Skelly than it is for Levon Makashvili right now.
The Skelly Hakran Diaz is a great fight. That makes a lot of matchmaking sense.
I don't know. I want to have faith in Makashvili because I think he is a top prospect, but we are realistically talking about somebody who's been fighting as a pro for 2-3 years. If you go back to his circuit fighting in Georgia, where he was when he was living there and fighting there, where he's really not going to be facing any kind of level of competition at all. But you're talking about somebody who has very little MMA experience versus somebody who's been around for a decade now and who, frankly, hasn't fallen off. Hakran Diaz is still... I haven't seen any signs that he's he beat Darren Elkins, who is a big... And Yuri Alcantara, but that was a few years ago now. But he beat Elkins in his last fight. Elkins is still a gatekeeper to the top 15. And Makashvili, I don't know that I trust him to be well-rounded enough. Diaz's biggest problem has always been that he doesn't seem to quite get winning in MMA. This is how I put together rounds to win fights and be consistent. but he's really athletic. He's really dangerous, and it does seem like things are kind of starting to click for him, and he's figuring out, okay, I actually have to like grind to keep positions and do the right things to actually stay on guys and win fights. And I think he'll just get by Makhachev. I think Makhachev will look good, but this feels a lot like the Nick Lentz fight for Makhachev, where I kind of was like, okay, he's going to lose this, but he'll probably look all right doing it.
I see. And so the odds makers have Hacker Diaz favored -180 to -220. And Levon Makashvili is the underdog at +150 all the way up to +171. And that brings us to hockey enforcer Steve Bossé versus Thiago Santos in the middleweight division. We've been waiting and waiting for Steve Bossé. He was supposed to come in as a last-minute substitute when they almost lost a main event. What? Anybody remember what he was almost in the fight, then he wasn't in the fight, and now he's anybody? Any idea? Anybody?
God,
All I remember about Steve Bossé is him almost getting guillotine choked by Houston Alexander.
That was quite exciting about. Yeah. So anyway, so Bossé is now getting to fill in against Thiago Santos, who, if I recall, is one of the duller fighters on the circuit.
No, that's a different. That's a different.
Oh, good.
Guy.
Well, good. Well, then tell us all about it.
All right. Steve Bossé was supposed to fight Fabio Maldonado at UFC 186.
And Rampage came back. That's the deal.
Yep. Bossé, this is a tough fight to call, actually. Santos is a high-output, aggressive kickboxer, and not a great one. Like, he's not bad, but he's sort of aggressive to a fault. And he's not powerful. Like he seems like he's small. Even though he's 6 foot, he seems like he's on the very small end of middleweight. Like he doesn't cut a lot of weight, or he's just really kind of stick thin in the division. And Bossé, he may not have been a huge light heavyweight, but he was definitely heavily muscled. Like he was pretty jacked for the division. And coming down to 185, he's still going to be kind of a big power puncher who is going to have a fighter in front of him who's not going to look to wrestle him, not going to look to grapple him, is most likely just going to look to charge at him and try and land kicks and knees and punches and do as much damage as he can as quickly as he can. So it's just the right kind of fight for Bossé. But I don't know, like, how good is Bossé? Like, that's... if he doesn't knock out Santos early, is he going to win this fight over 3 rounds? I really seriously doubt it. So I'm going to pick Santos here. I don't think Bossé's good enough to actually get a quick knockout over somebody who's even reasonably tough in the UFC. But I think that's the game we're looking at, is Bossé either knocks him out in the first 2 minutes or loses.
And Connor, your thoughts?
I'm forced to agree. This is going to sound crazy, but I know it was like embarrassing for Steve Bossé to almost get submitted by Houston Alexander with a front choke, but he also deigned to stand with Houston Alexander and did very well for himself. I know Alexander's not like an amazing striker, but most of the people who've beaten him in MMA have not just chosen to play his game. And, Bossé hung with him there and knocked him out. Like, that's not terrible. That's not a terrible accolade to have on your resume. So, yeah, Santos has usually condescended to strike with his opponents. And so I think Bossé's got a serious chance here. I could easily make the same pick that I made for which fight did I make this pick for? Martinez, Kukai, or for Montgomery Sims, where I'm basically making Zane's pick for that fight. Zane picked the power puncher to knock the hittable guy out early. But I could easily see it going the way I predicted that fight, where Santos absorbs or avoids the early onslaught and comes back and proves that actually being a real mixed martial artist is a benefit too. But why not? I'm picking Steve Bossé.
I see. And Zane?
No, I picked
already.
Santos, but I don't think there's any harm in picking Bossé. Santos has no defense and is very willing to just run at guys throwing shit.
If only they could be on skates, wearing jerseys, and have sticks. This would be Bossy's fight.
If only. How many times can you say that in life?
I know. I've been waiting for Bossé to get in the UFC, and I gave up on it happening, and now dreams come true. The odds makers, though, they like Santos better. They've got him favored -185 to -210. Bossé is the underdog at +155 all the way up to +180. And that brings us to Antonio Carlos Jr. versus Eddie Gordon in the middleweight division. And Zane, I'm going to let Connor talk first just because,
Why'd you tell Zane that? What a cruel trick.
Just to confuse and whatever. Talk.
This card has to be somehow exciting. This fight is a bummer. Like, this is just depressing. Eddie Gordon's coming off 2 losses. Eddie Gordon looked to be a pretty solid fighter coming off of the Ultimate Fighter. I think he still has potential to turn into that. Obviously, he's at a good camp. He's got a great training partner around his size in Chris Weidman, so it's hard to ask for better than that. But he has really seemed kind of aimless in his last 2 fights. I mean, granted, obviously his strategy against Josh Salmon was to hold Josh down and win the decision because Josh has proven in the past to be a little susceptible to those wrestlers. So you can't really fault him for that. And then getting caught at range, being an inexperienced striker and not much of a kicker, that's fine too. So, that's forgivable. But then in that last fight with
Chris Dempsey.
Like, it was just like aimlessness.
Bad.
Yeah,
Bad,
like
is the word you're looking
it was.
for.
Yeah, where like Eddie was like tired, which didn't used to be really a big problem in his fights, except on Tough, where he was cutting a lot because he's big. So he normally seems to handle the weight cut okay, but on Tough it really hurt him. This time it looked like one of his Tough fights. Like he was slow. He was just incredibly hittable. He was receiving a lot of good tactical advice from Ray Longo that he just didn't seem able to employ. He didn't really seem able to do those things. I asked for the left hook after the overhand right over and over and over, and it never came. Meanwhile, Dempsey was like lighting up, and Dempsey's not a great striker. Like, he's a very run-of-the-mill MMA wrestle boxer, so that's not a good sign. Fortunately, I guess this shows that the UFC has more hope in the American products of Tough than they do in the Brazilian products, because Eddie Gordon should beat Antonio Carlos Jr. Zane doesn't think so. Zane disagrees. I've been utterly unimpressed with Antonio Carlos Jr. Like just horrible on his feet, like generations out of date in terms of mixed martial arts striking. And like a guy who just happily played a guard game against Patrick Cummins doesn't really say a lot about his chances against a guy who will happily wrestle him and grind him out. Now, granted, Eddie Gordon's inexperienced, so he's going to put his hands on the mat. He's going to get himself off balance. He's going to leave himself in positions that a jiu-jitsu player like Antonio Carlos Jr. can exploit. So the openings are there. It's a much closer fight than I would like it to be, given the potential I thought Gordon had. But I do think Gordon has the edge here.
And Zane, disagree with Connor.
Dude just lost to Chris Dempsey. I'm sorry, but like, that was terrible. He looked as bad as any fighter in the UFC in that fight. Like, he just looked god awful. And for all of the hope that I and others have had in Eddie Gordon developing, that was like a massive step back for him. If he comes in looking anything like that, I can't possibly pick him to win. Antonio Carlos Jr., his fight with Patrick Cummins, I think Carlos Jr. fought himself out of that fight. Like, he basically he was beating Cummins on the feet pretty handily. His striking may not, he may be wooden and stand stock stiff and not be exciting, but he was much better than Cummins and easily beating him there. And then he would just walk himself straight into the clinch or into takedowns and try and like out wrestle Cummins. And that was really dumb. I don't think Gordon has nearly the power wrestling that Cummins has and the technical variety to go to that would cause him problems. And I don't think that he can lay and pray Carlos Jr., and I don't think he has the cardio to strike for more than half a round. So at this point, I don't see how he's going to beat anyone. Like, I can't pick Gordon to beat anyone on the UFC roster right now.
Well, I mean, but here's the thing though. Like, that kind of smacks of recency bias to me. Like, I know you're only as good as your last fight, but that fight was far and away a different and worse Eddie Gordon than we've seen in any other performances from him. Like, it definitely, as I said, fell in line with the quality we saw from him on The Ultimate Fighter. But that's why I'm willing to believe that, like, bad weight cut, bad camp, something like that really played a bigger role, because he seemed to have, like, no energy or desire to win. Like, something seemed mentally off with Eddie Gordon in that fight.
See,
and so
I mean, we're talking about a fighter that lay and prayed Josh Saman, and he's not going to lay him. I don't think he can lay and pray Carlos Jr. I think that Carlos Jr. is a bigger, more aggressive grappler than Saman, and I think he's more powerful. And then he looked terrible against Dempsey, and then he knocked out Diego Lima, who's Diego Lima. I mean, like, the world knocks out Diego Lima.
He's Diego Lima. That is a good point. I definitely see your argument.
He has no name wins to his credit at all.
True.
None.
True. But what about Antonio Carlos Jr.? Where are his name wins?
I mean, he at least beat Vitor Miranda. I don't think that.
He said names, but
like,
that wasn't even words.
I think that his run on Tough was at least knock out two guys and submit a third. Like, it's at least more impressive than what Eddie Gordon did on Tough. Like, I've never seen anything out of Eddie Gordon that looks more like he has a little bit of athletic potential and he's developing. Like, I've never seen anything out of him that really amazes me.
Fair enough.
Well, time will tell. We'll find out Saturday night. Eddie Gordon is the underdog, plus 160 all the way up to plus 174, and Antonio Carlos Jr. is favored, not just by Zane, but by the odds makers as well, minus 190 all the way up to minus 235. And that brings us to the co-main event, welterweights Lorenz Larkin and Santiago Ponzinibbio, a fighter whose name I'm beginning to come to terms with because I can cut and paste it. But actually, he's at first he was boring and had an impossible to spell name, but the guy's consistently improved, so I'm kind of excited about this fight. Zane, you can go first.
Yeah, I like this fight. This is a great proving fight for two guys who really need to prove themselves. Ponzinibbio, really more than anything, has just been injury prone since getting to the UFC. He's fought 3 times, once in each of the past 3 years. And this will be the first time that he's fought twice in a year since getting to the UFC, so this is a big thing for him. But he looks great at welterweight, and he looks like things are really starting to actually click for him. Like, the fight he had against Sean Strickland, he looked worlds better than he's ever looked before. He was combination kickboxing. He was just running circles around Strickland. He's still got power. He's got accuracy. He just looks like a much better fighter. And for Larkin, he looked great against John Howard too, but I also think Howard's probably on the slide. And so I'm not sure. That doesn't tell me whether or not Larkin has solved any of his classic problems, which are mostly that he can't defend while he strikes. He's either a good offensive kickboxer, and he's learned to up his output and become a more potent, consistent kickboxer, or he's completely in a defensive shell. But like what we saw when he fought Derek Brunson and Costa Philippou, with Philippou, like, he was winning when his output was high, but when his output was high, Philippou was just able to crack him. And then with Brunson, he would throw big flurries, get taken down because he had no defensive positioning, and then when Brunson fired it back at him, all he could do was cover up against the cage and try to wait it out. And Ponzinibbio is good enough, I think, to be in that Philippou area. So he's got to show that he's improved to be beyond the fighter who lost badly to Costa Philippou. And I don't know if he has yet. I think that welterweight's a great place to test that, but I'm going to pick Philippou. I have more faith that he's actually made improvements than Larkin has, who I just can't trust.
See? And you meant to say you picked Ponzinibbio, not Philippou.
Oh, Ponzinibbio, yeah, not Philippou.
So, all right, so a rare moment of lucidity on my part. Connor, your thoughts on the fight?
Nate woke up from his nap, just to correct you. Now, shut your eyes, Nate. I'm going to start talking now. It's a great fight. matchup-wise. Like, I absolutely agree with everything Zane said. It's so difficult to judge where Lorenz Larkin is at. It's almost like the fact that he seemed to kind of dominate and wreck John Howard made it even more difficult to judge where he's at, because it was such a huge bounce back from where he'd been in his previous fights, getting knocked out, getting dominated, and like Eddie Gordon, just seeming to kind of meander his way through a fight until he lost one way or the other. And then against John Howard, we see him employing some nice range striking, employing nice takedown defense, obviously getting a devastating knockout. I know there's no chance of this happening now, but I wish I'd been able to see that fight go on a little longer, just so I could kind of feel comfortable predicting anything from Lorenz Larkin. I don't know, man. I really don't know. As for Ponzinibbio, Ponzinibbio to me kind of seems like the kind of guy who has always given Larkin trouble. He doesn't have the grappling chops of the guys who have stifled Larkin, but he's got the pressure. And I think that has often been the thing that troubled Lorenz Larkin. That's what troubled him against Philippou, as Zane said. The fact that he was pushed back, these looping shots that come over his kind of porous defense. When Larkin doesn't have the space to move, he really relies on distance and angles for his defense. He doesn't block punches well. He doesn't really parry. He doesn't move his head. He's very much like a taekwondo kind of stylist. Like, it's all in the foot movement. And so when he gets trapped and the range is cut off, all it takes is one shot, and he's not going to move with it to absorb it. He's not going to partially take it with his glove. He's going to get hit clean. So, I know Ponzinibbio can do that. He's done it in his past few fights, and I know he can pour it on and go for the finish. And as much as he kind of seemed boring when he came into the UFC, Ponzinibbio's record is full of finishes. He, whether in the grappling or the striking department, he kind of has made his career on getting guys out of there in devastating fashion. So I'd love to see a Larkin win and see some things out of Larkin. What I'd most like to see either way is to see this fight go a few rounds, go at least like a round and a half, so I can get an idea of where both guys are at. And it's a definite get-over fight for either guy. Beating Lorenz Larkin is still a big name. It's still a dangerous striker. That says a lot about Ponzinibbio's abilities. And beating Ponzinibbio, who's very well-rounded and very dangerous, says a lot about how Larkin might actually be able to do at welterweight. So I'm going to pick Ponzinibbio, but all I'm really hoping for is a good fight that goes for a little time so I can enjoy the action. All
right, and if you like to gamble, our panel is flying contrary to the odds makers who like Lorenz Larkin. They've got him favored at -201 all the way up to -240, and Santiago Ponzinibbio is the underdog at +170 all the way up to +190. And that brings us to our middleweight main event, Lyoto Machida versus Yoel Romero. Why do I keep thinking this is Hector Lombard? Yoel Romero, Cuban, former Olympic wrestler, or I guess he didn't make the Olympics, but a high-level world competitor wrestler. Tends to have the same thing, though. Kind of slow output, plods around the cage, can suddenly explode into lethal combinations. Is that going to work against the very elusive and unique Lyoto Machida's karate stylings? Zane, you can go first.
Wait, didn't make the Olympics? I thought he won a silver medal.
Yeah, he was an Olympic silver medalist.
Yes. Well, what do I know?
Okay, so yeah.
That's why you're here.
Yoel Romero, you know what? I think last week I decided to take the leap, and I'm all in on it. I think Yoel Romero is going to win this fight. Because I think that while Machida is still a supreme technical stylist and is still as fast as he used to be and as accurate, I don't think he's as physically competitive as he used to be. And I think that's what we saw in the Rockhold fight, was really when it got in tight, when he actually had to match strength with Rockhold, Rockhold just kind of threw him to the ground. It was just kind of just dumped him in a way that, we've never really saw Machida, that happened to Machida early in his career or up until that fight even against Chris Weidman. I don't know that we really saw Weidman just kind of throw him. And Romero is a physical freak. He is just a freak of nature. There's nobody more athletic at middleweight than Yoel Romero. Nobody. And I don't think Machida can match that. I think Machida can, do well and be good if Romero just decides to play an outside boxing game like he has at times in his career. Like, if he decides to fight Machida like he did Derek Brunson, then I think Machida can certainly win this fight. But if he fights him like he did Tim Kennedy or like he did, Brad Tavares, I don't think Machida wins. And I think that lately what we've seen since that Brunson fight is a Romero who's more driven than ever to use all the tools he has. So I'm picking Romero by maybe by TKO.
Ouch. And Connor, your thoughts?
I would just like to say, fuck this fight, because Lyoto Machida has for a long time been one of my favorite fighters, and it's a really rough matchup to give him after that loss to Luke Rockhold. Like, this is just not a comeback fight of any kind, and I suspect that Machida did not want a comeback fight. I suspect that Machida wanted another credible opponent, and props to him for that. The feeling I'm getting from Machida these days is that he's been fading for a while, and that he's kind of covered up the symptoms of age and wear and tear by, moving down to middleweight, by adopting more of an aggressive pressuring style. So now he's bigger relative to his opponents, and now he doesn't have to rely on his reaction time quite so much and counter quite so much. And granted, I think Machida, for as long as he wants to fight, he will be capable of flashes of brilliance. And Machida is absolutely one of those fighters Machida is kind of one of those fighters that makes you care almost emotionally about combat sports. A guy who you can just imagine him being 45 years old and having lost 10 fights in a row and knocking out a top contender just because that's what good fighters do. And Lyoto Machida is and always will be a good fighter. But the real thing, that Luke Rockhold fight, yes, getting hurt by Rockhold, that was tough to see. Machida seemed easier to buzz in his recent fights than he ever used to be. This is a guy who used to eat clean punches like nobody's business and then just walk through with a counter. He used to have a really great chin. And we saw some of that stiff-leggedness that we saw against John Jones after that big elbow on the ground. We saw that for moments in the Weidman fight, and Machida fought through it. And we saw it, him trying to fight through it in the Luke Rockhold fight. That's all worrying. The chin may be going, the resilience may be going. What's more worrying is, as Zane pointed out, the fact that Rockhold really just seemed to have his way with Machida physically. And if even moving down to middleweight can't let you compete physically with the fighters and on a strength basis, then what hope is there, especially against guys like Weidman, like Rockhold, like Yoel Romero? These are physical specimens. These are guys who use their strength, their leverage, their natural physical advantages to beat up their opponents. And so, if Yoel Romero chooses to strike at range, which he's not bad at, this fight becomes more interesting and more winnable for Machida. But I do think, as always, like I said, Machida always has a path to victory.
Yeah.
And so he could win this fight. But I think for the rest of Machida's career, and I said this on this week's episode of Heavy Hands too, I said as a huge Machida mark, I'm just going to go into all of his fights from now on expecting him to lose. And then if he does, I will at least have foreseen it. And if he wins, I can be so pleasantly surprised I will lose my shit and go bananas. So I think Machida's going to lose. I think he's going to get out-muscled, out-wrestled, and quite possibly badly beaten up on the ground, just like Rockhold did to him. And it's not going to be fun to watch, but that's my gut feeling.
Unless you're Yoel Romero's family, and then it could be thrilling. But we'll see. I don't know. I still feel like Romero is a little bit slow on the feet, a little bit slow to pull the trigger. I could see him chasing, and he's not necessarily that adept at cutting off the cage. So I could see him chasing Machida around. But, yeah, if they make contact, it's hard to see anything good happening for Machida. It's just Yoel Romero is a scary dude.
I'd love to see it, though.
Yeah, but Machida is favored. He's anywhere from minus 180 all the way up to minus 200. Yoel Romero is the underdog at plus 150 all the way up to plus 168. So that sounds like a bet to make. Connor, do you have any other value bets you see?
Weirdly enough, the best betting opportunities on this card are in the main and co-main event. Usually you find those little gems on the prelims, but all of those are such weird toss-up matchups, it's tough to think any of them seem good, whereas I think Ponzinibbio and Romero are both excellent underdog bets. I mean, I would almost take them as underdogs against anybody because they're very good fighters. So that's tempting.
Well, there you go. There you go. And I guess that's our final thoughts for the show. Remember to give us a thumbs up on YouTube. Subscribe to MMANation.com on YouTube. Subscribe to MMA Nation on iTunes. Follow us on Twitter at BoxingBush, B-U-S-C-H. That's Connor, at the Zane Simon, which is Zane, at KidNight, which is me. And read us on BloodyElbow.com. You can also listen to Connor's Heavy Hands podcast. All right, fellas. Adios, MMA aficionados. Thanks very much. And Zane?